The word was spray-painted in white letters across the driver's door. Dead. Not scratched, not written in mud, spray-painted, deliberately, like someone wanted to make absolutely sure nobody wasted their time looking twice. It was a 1952 Chevrolet Wrecker, Home's 480 boom, chain-drive winch, the kind of truck that had probably pulled half the county out of ditches before most of the men standing around it were born. The red paint, what was left of it, had faded to something closer to rust-colored fog. The left rear tire was flat and cracked so badly it had started to separate from the rim. The boom was bent maybe 12 degrees off-center. Both mirrors were gone. The winch cable was seized so tight around the drum it looked like it had been welded there. Someone had written dead on it. And honestly, looking at it that October morning in 1983 at the Harlan County Equipment Auction in Alma, Nebraska, it was hard to argue. There were maybe 60 men standing around that lot, farmers mostly, a few contractors, 2 men from the county highway department, and a dealer named Roy Cutler who sold new Fords out of a lot on the edge of town and considered himself something of an authority on what was worth money and what wasn't. Roy was wearing a red coverall that day, clean, pressed. He had a habit of showing up to auctions looking like he just stepped out of a showroom, which was either confidence or theater, and with Roy Cutler it was usually both. When the auctioneer finally announced the wrecker, almost apologetically, the way you announce the last item nobody wanted, Roy walked over to it, put both hands on his hips and laughed. Not a small laugh. The kind that makes other men feel comfortable laughing too. "Tell you what," Roy said, loud enough for the whole lot to hear. "Whoever buys that thing ought to get a shovel with it. Save time digging the hole." More laughter. The auctioneer smiled. A couple of farmers shook their heads the way men do when something is too obviously true to argue with. That's when a 23-year-old named Cale Dempsey raised his hand. Cal's father, Leonard Dempsey, had run a one-man recovery operation out of a tin-roofed garage on Route 4 for 22 years. Nothing fancy. A 1961 Ford F600 with a light-duty Holmes boom and enough knowledge to get most of Harlan County unstuck on a bad night. Leonard had never advertised, never needed to. Word of mouth in a county that small travels faster than a phone call. Leonard died in the spring of 1981. Heart attack. He was 54 years old, which felt like a theft to everyone who knew him. The Ford went with the estate. Debts had to be settled. Cal was left with the garage, his father's tools, a reputation that wasn't quite his yet, and no truck. For 2 years he'd done what he could. Mechanical work. Borrowed equipment when he had to. Saved a little money, not much. Then the Harlan County auction posted its equipment list, and somewhere near the bottom, almost as a footnote, was a 1952 Chevrolet Wrecker, condition unknown, sold as is. Cal had driven out the night before the auction, walked around that truck in the dark with a flashlight for 40 minutes. He saw the flat tire. He saw the bent boom. He saw dead painted on the door in letters someone had clearly meant as a verdict. But he also saw the frame. Most people at an auction look at what's visible: tires, glass, sheet metal, rust. They form opinions in 90 seconds and trust them completely. Cal looked at the frame. The 1952 Chevrolet was built on a ladder frame, 2 parallel steel rails running the full length of the truck. The backbone of everything the truck was and everything it could do. And that frame on this particular truck was straight, not bent, not cracked, not twisted from years of overloading or hard pulls. Straight. In the recovery business, that's the only thing that matters long-term. You can replace tires. You can straighten a boom. You can free a seized winch drum. You cannot fix a bent frame, not in a way that holds up when the weight comes on. Cal ran his hand along the left frame rail in the dark, feeling for any deviation, any soft spot, any sign that the steel had given up somewhere along the line. It hadn't. He went home, counted his money, and came back the next morning with $200 in his wallet. The bidding lasted about 45 seconds. Nobody wanted it. The auctioneer started at $50. Silence. Dropped to 25. Cal raised his hand. The auctioneer looked relieved, looked around the lot for anyone else. 25. Do I hear 50? 200, Cal said. The auctioneer blinked. Roy Cutler stopped smiling. Not because the number was large, it wasn't, but because nobody bids against themselves on junk. That's not how rational people behave. Roy called out from the edge of the crowd. Son, you just bought yourself a very expensive lawn ornament. The men around him laughed. Easier this time, more comfortable, the way laughter gets when it's been invited to stay. Cal walked to the payment table, handed over his money, and collected his receipt without looking at Roy Cutler. A seized winch drum means the cable has been sitting static under tension for so long that rust has fused the outer wraps to the inner layer. You can't just unwind it. Penetrating oil, heat, patient pressure applied at specific points. It took Cal 11 days to free that drum. 11 days of working mornings before his other jobs, evenings after them, flashlight propped on the fender, hands black with old grease and rust. The boom took a week to straighten. Steel posts anchored in the floor, a hydraulic press his father had left behind, measurements taken and retaken. He straightened it over 3 sessions, a degree at a time, heating the steel to just the right temperature to let it move without losing strength. When he was done, the boom was true within a 1/4 degree. The engine started on the 3rd attempt, a rough idle at first, blowing blue smoke as the fresh oil found its way into new clearances. Then it smoothed, slowly, the way old engines smooth when they remember what they're supposed to do. He painted the truck himself, dark green, the color his father had used on the Ford. He painted over the dead on the door last, took 3 coats to fully cover it. Even after the 3rd coat, in certain light, at certain angles, you could still see the ghost of those white letters underneath. Cal saw them every time he looked at the door and didn't try to put a 4th coat over them. He thought of it as a reminder of something he hadn't quite decided the name of yet. The wrecker was road ready by the spring of 1985, 16 months after the auction. By summer, a few people had called Cal quietly for small jobs, a farmer stuck in a field, a teenager who'd put his pickup in a ditch on a gravel road. Nothing dramatic, nothing that tested the truck, just the slow, ordinary proving out of a working piece of equipment. Roy Cutler heard about it at the diner and told the story again, the auction, the $200, the kid and his junk wrecker, and the men laughed, though a little less hard than before. Laughing at something that's running is slightly less comfortable than laughing at something that's dead. But Roy's basic point stood as far as he was concerned. That truck had a limit. He just didn't know what night that limit would be tested. The winter of 1986 came early to Harlan County. By the first week of December, the temperature had dropped to single digits and stayed there. The roads were glazed with black ice that the county trucks couldn't treat fast enough. On the night of December 11th, a grain hauler went off Route 34 about 9 miles west of Alma. A 1979 Kenworth, loaded. The driver hit a patch of ice at the crest of a long curve and lost it before he understood what was happening. The truck went through the guardrail and dropped off a 12-foot embankment into the frozen ditch below. It came to rest on its driver's side. The driver got out through the passenger window, cuts on his hands and forehead, nothing serious, and flagged down the next car. By the time the first patrol car arrived, the situation was already complicated. The Kenworth was fully loaded, 80,000 pounds of corn, lying on its side in a frozen ditch with the roof against the embankment. The embankment was soft soil that had been refreezing and thawing all fall and was not going to hold anchor weight. Route 34 was closed in both directions, the only through road connecting the western half of the county to Alma. 2 recovery outfits came in from Kearney. The first was a 1984 Ford Louisville heavy-duty, rear-mounted Holmes 750 rotator boom. The operator looked at the Kenworth for 10 minutes, walked the ditch, tested the slope with his boot. To right the truck, You needed a sustained angled pull that would rotate the cab up and away from the slope. But the frost had only gone 4 inches deep. Below that was soft soil. At the weight he'd need to put on that shoulder, there was a real chance of it giving way. He called his company. His company said not to risk the equipment. He packed up and drove back to Kearney. The second rig arrived 40 minutes later. Newer equipment, same problem, same conclusion. By 10 o'clock Route 34 had been closed for 3 hours. The temperature had dropped to 4 degrees. The grain was beginning to freeze in the trailer. The deputy on scene had run out of options that anyone was willing to try. That's when Cale Dempsey pulled up. He'd heard it on the scanner. That was the habit his father had given him, sleeping with the volume low on the nightstand, waking up when something sounded like work. He arrived to find 2 sets of recovery tire tracks in the snow, both pointing away from the scene. The deputy looked at the green wrecker, at the Holmes 480 boom, at Cal. "You a recovery operator?" "Cale Dempsey. My father ran this county for 20 years. The deputy thought for a moment. He remembered Leonard. Most people in the county remembered Leonard. 2 outfits from Kearney already looked at it and walked. "I know, I'd like to look anyway." Cal stood at the top of the embankment for a long time, not doing anything, just looking. The Kenworth lay below him, its undercarriage facing the road, its cab against the slope. The frame looked intact. The trailer hadn't separated from the fifth wheel. That was something. He climbed down carefully, walked around the truck, checked the frame rails. He was looking for 2 things. The first was the anchor problem, where to put his truck to pull and whether the ground would hold. The second thing was what his father had always thought about first. How does this truck want to move? Every overturned vehicle has a geometry to it, a path of least resistance. The way the weight is distributed, the way the frame is resting, the angle of the slope, all of it adds up to a direction the vehicle would naturally go if the right force was applied in the right place. Fighting that tendency costs you everything. Working with it costs you a fraction. He climbed back up and walked the road shoulder. He wasn't looking at the soft soil the way the Kearney operators had. He was looking at the section of guardrail the Kenworth had broken through, more precisely, at the post anchors still in the ground about 15 feet to either side of the gap. Those anchors were set in Depression-era concrete. Old concrete, dense, deep. He looked at the angle from those anchors to the Kenworth, measured it in his head. Then he went back to his truck. He rigged a snatch block to the left guardrail anchor. The snatch block redirected the pull. Instead of a straight line from his winch to the Kenworth, it created an angled pull that would rotate the truck up and away from the slope, the direction it naturally wanted to go. He ran the cable from the drum through the snatch block and down the embankment to the Kenworth's frame. He wasn't pulling from the soft shoulder at all. He was pulling from frozen asphalt, with his truck angled so the frame took the tension. The deputy walked over when Cal was back behind the wheel. "You sure about this?" Cal thought about the frame he'd found in the dark with a flashlight 3 years ago. The straight one, the one nobody else had checked. "Ask me when I'm done," he said. "There is a sound that a Holmes 480 winch makes under real load that you don't forget if you've ever heard it. Not electronic, not hydraulic, mechanical, a low, steady grinding and clicking, the teeth of something old and patient catching one at a time on every notch of the drum. That sound started at 10:47 on the night of December 11th. The cable went tight slowly. The snatch block at the guardrail anchor creaked once loudly and then held. For a long moment nothing visible happened. The Kenworth lay exactly where it had been. The temperature was 4 degrees and dropping. Then the deputy heard something, a low groan from under the ice in the ditch. He thought at first it was the embankment giving. It wasn't. It was the Kenworth's frame taking the load, beginning by an amount too small to see to shift its geometry in the direction Cal had calculated. Cal watched his winch gauge, held steady. The truck moved, An inch of rotation at the cab, maybe two. The deputy said something under his breath that wasn't quite a word. 5 degrees of rotation. The cab lifting slightly from the slope, the weight redistributing. Cale increased tension by 10%. The winch growled deeper. The cable sang. The depression-era concrete held without complaint. 15 degrees. 20. At 25 degrees of rotation, the truck reached its tipping point. The same physics that had put it on its side now worked in reverse. The weight of the loaded trailer. The height of the center of gravity. Everything that had made this truck a problem was now making it a solution. The Kenworth came up, with a groan and a lurch and a crash of grain shifting in the frozen trailer. 4 wheels on the ground, stable, upright. The sound of it landing echoed across the frozen fields, and then disappeared into the cold. The deputy stood still, turned to look at Cale's wrecker, looked at the winch drum, the cable, the snatch block, the anchor, turned back to the Kenworth, took off his hat, didn't put it back on. Cale had the Kenworth on the shoulder and Route 34 open by 12:40 in the morning. The deputy filed his report. 2 men at the county highway department recognized the technique, the redirection of pull through a fixed anchor, as something they'd seen once before, done by a recovery operator named Leonard Dempsey on a county road job in the winter of 1974. The son had used the father's method. On the father's truck, rebuilt from what everyone had called a dead thing. By the weekend, the story was at the diner in Alma. By the following week, it had reached the feed store and the co-op. Roy Cutler heard it from 3 different men, which meant it wasn't rumor. He drove past Cale's garage on the way home. The green wrecker was parked out front. In certain morning light, at a certain angle, you could still see the ghost outline of white letters on the driver's door. Roy sat in his truck at the road's edge for a minute. Then he drove on. He didn't stop, didn't knock, didn't say anything to Cale directly, but he stopped telling the story. The one about the lawn ornament. When someone brought it up at the diner, Roy would pick up his coffee cup and look out the window and find something else to say. That was, for Roy Cutler, the closest thing to an apology he knew how to make. The discovery happened by accident. February of 1987. Cale was replacing the driver's door seal, and when he peeled back the vapor barrier behind the inner panel, something fell out of the cavity between the inner and outer door skins. A folded piece of oilcloth, sealed with electrical tape dried to brittleness. Inside, a notebook, spiral-bound. The cover stained but the pages dry. The oilcloth had done its job for however long that notebook had been sitting in that door. The first page said, "Property of Earl T. McGuire, McGuire Recovery, Enid, Oklahoma. If found, please return." What followed was a logbook. Every job Earl McGuire had run with that truck, recorded by date, location, load recovered, method used, outcome. April 1953 to November 1961. 8.5 years of recovery work across Oklahoma, Kansas, Texas, and Colorado. The handwriting was precise and mechanical. The handwriting of a man who understood that details matter and memory is not reliable under pressure. There were 847 entries. Cale read for 2 hours without stopping. And there, in November of 1957, were 2 separate entries describing a guardrail anchor and a snatch block used to change the angle of pull on an overturned vehicle that nothing else could move. The same method, the same logic, written down 29 years before Cale had used it on Route 34. He made 1 phone call that week to the Enid area code in the notebook. The number had been disconnected. He tried the operator, eventually found a woman who remembered Earl McGuire, his daughter. She told Cale that Earl had died in 1963, 2 years after the last entry. She didn't know anything about the truck, didn't know it had been sold or how it had ended up in Nebraska with a word spray-painted on its door. Cale told her about the logbook, about the 847 entries, about what kind of operator her father had been. She was quiet for a long time. He talked about that truck like it was a member of the family, she said finally. When he sold it, he didn't talk for about a week. Cal told her he'd take care of it. He meant the truck, but he also meant everything the truck carried. The method, the knowledge, the 847 jobs recorded in precise handwriting by a man who understood that some things are worth writing down even if nobody ever reads them. Earl McGuire's logbook sits on the shelf above the workbench in Cale Dempsey's garage to this day. Not framed, not displayed, just sitting there the way a useful thing sits when it belongs somewhere and everyone knows it. The green wrecker is still there too. The frame, that straight, sound, honest frame that nobody at the auction bothered to check, has never needed anything. Roy Cutler stopped in once, maybe a year after he retired. He stood next to the truck for a while, looking at the door, at the ghost of the letters underneath 3 coats of dark green enamel. "I was wrong about this truck," he said. Cal nodded once. "You were." Roy put his hat back on. "Your father would have known." "Yes," Cal said, "he would have." Roy walked out. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Some trucks carry more than weight. This one carried a method, a logbook hidden in its door for 30 years. The knowledge of 2 men who had never met, Earl McGuire in Oklahoma and Leonard Dempsey in Nebraska, who had arrived at the same truth by different roads. The ground under a problem is always more important than the power above it. The 1952 Chevrolet Wrecker sold at the Harlan County Equipment Auction for $200. It had a word spray-painted on its door. Everyone there that morning saw exactly what it appeared to be. One man saw what it actually was. And on the night of December 11, 1986, when the temperature was 4 degrees and the road was closed and 2 outfits from Kearney had already driven away, that one man started his winch, held steady, and let the old truck do what it had always been built to do. The county road was open by 12:40 in the morning. And the word on the door stayed where it was, underneath the paint, where Cale Dempsey could see it every single day. Not as a verdict anymore, as a reminder of what it costs to know the difference between what something looks like and what something is.